Thank you very much. I'm here to speak about digitalization from an economic perspective. It's a term that I call Diginomics. So it's actually a term that me and my colleagues invented to capture the digitalization, the trends of digitalization from a macroeconomics perspective and put it in the macroeconomic framework and also see where the methods and tools for measure the gains from digitalizations are scarce. So digitalization is, so this term is actually digitalization from an economic perspective, a societal perspective, and also from a regulatory perspective. Because digitalization is something that is spurring globalization, it's spurring urbanization, and it's spurring individualization, and it's also spurring a new type of economy called the network economy that is actually changing value creation in the society. And digitalization is also challenging or changing value change and price models and competitive situations. And it's in a very accelerating speed. You heard about Moore's law. But from an economic perspective, it's the fact the speed that is different or faster than other technological paradigm shift is that we have very low fixed costs. So we have open source, we have storage for very low cost, and we have very low transaction costs. And also the fact that it costs 0 crowns to transport, distribute, and copy digital services is making a supply shock of digital goods and services. But also, we have the big data, Internet of Things, and cheap data storage that is enabling artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is different from hard-coded software because we ask artificial intelligence to make subjective decisions based on imperfect information. So it's creating a lot more, and this is where the curve becomes exponential. But it also makes artificial intelligence do mistakes, just as we do. So from an economic perspective, we always look at what is this technological paradigm shift reducing the cost of. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, it's reducing the cost of predictions. So we tend to want to define what kind of phase or where we are in this technological paradigm shift. And I tend to want to speak about it from a general purpose technology perspective. It's an economic term, and it's based on 3 waves. The first wave with the same generic technology. The first phase, we have a low maturity in the technology, low usage. And then the second wave, we have a widespread usage and maturity. And then the third wave, we have this magic called cross-fertilization, where different sectors use the technology, and we see the exponential curve going almost vertical. So we have the first wave behind us with the IT boom, and we saw very vertical productivity gains from hardware. In the second wave, which I would define as that we are in the latter part of it, it's where IT becomes mobile, very consumer-driven, disrupting a lot of industry, and it's characterized by the supply shock of digital services, also slashed middle hands being replaced by trust but on digital platforms by peers. That's the sharing economy. But also the automation on the labor market, making this mid-skill squeeze more defined. But as we enter, and we see that sectors are being disrupted, some high entry barriers, and some have lower. When we enter the third wave, it becomes very clear that our regulatory framework and our societal contract is being challenged. And the third way is characterized by this cross-fertilization. For example, we're using banking ID when we do our tax declaration and so on. So the artificial intelligence, the robotics, or actually when the artificial intelligence goes from being virtual, I mean in the gaming industry you can go crazy, it's virtual with no rules and no ethic restrictions, but when it comes to be physical, when it's actually robotics and self-driving cars, the regulatory framework will be challenged, and it's going very fast. Also gene modification and this breakthrough of Internet of Things, that we have so much data integrity in the hands of who? Well, you see the challenge. And what my research right now is based upon is a new measure for productivity or value. And why is this important? Well, first we underestimate the productivity due to digitalization. It's actually so that we overestimated it in the first wave, and we had a lot of hardware development. This is important because we need to differentiate price models, but also from a regulatory, political, and economic perspective, we need to know where to put our investments in the right place. So the first reason why productivity is underestimated, I would argue, is because the pricing of digital services and goods. So there's a lot of free digital services, but there's also a price mechanism called bundling. You have the Spotify prescription for 99 crowns a month, and then you have falling marginal cost, not captured in GDP. This will eventually evolve as companies tend to diversify, and we have micropayments coming up. So you pay more for the Netflix latest movie than the Bond movie from the 60s, right? But actually the next step, and this is again, if you want a really high competence in AI and new form of collectiveness, because young people today, they're individual, but they're also very collective. So I was at this gaming incubator here in Gothenburg, and I asked them, what about your pricing models? Well, they say, well, you pay if you want, as much as you want. So eventually, we will figure this out. But the fact that the pricing model is not measuring per unit consumption is making us underestimate productivity. Second, time optimization. So in economic terms, time optimization in leisure time is a consumer surplus. This is something that consumer games that are actually ready to pay more for than they are. This consumer surplus is larger and increasing compared to other technological shifts, and we need how to capture this. And this is what my research is about, because actually we're gaining more hours and we're gaining more quality within these hours. So if you do your errands on the bus, or if you you pay your taxes, you do your bank errands, and you select the basket of food you want for dinner. If you gain 2 hours per day by this digital goods in time optimization, it's actually 0.6% of GDP that is missing out. So it has a lot of impact. The third reason why we're underestimating productivity due to digitalization is the value created in the network from the sharing economy, through the collaborative economy, through sharing and co-creation. So for example, the app Waze It's an app that Google bought 2013 for $1.1 billion. You actually produce something, that is, you share weather circumstances and traffic information on the shared app. And you produce it for free and you consume it for free. And what is it gaining? Well, it's risk minimization and time optimization. And none of this value is measured in traditional GDP. And digitalization is also rapidly changing labor market. And in the third wave, we see that politicians and educational systems are going to lag behind even further. So the automation is making routine tasks without physical interference. They're slashing those jobs first. But also, when we see with artificial intelligence, all the way from low-skilled jobs to high-skilled jobs are being replaced. We see studies that 50% of the labor market would be unemployed in 2020. That may be so, but there are also new jobs being created. And this comes from innovation. It comes from self-employed, the gig economy, jobs in the sharing economy. But it also needs to come from the way we interact with new technologies such as blockchain and artificial intelligence and virtual reality, augmented reality. So there's a new type of middle class, if you say so, if we have this mid-skilled squeeze, that comes from interface with new technology. Also, we see this polarized trend. When it comes to prices, we see that you consume music with falling marginal price, you watch the concerts on your YouTube for free, but you tend to want to pay a lot for live performance. So even people want to pay for tickets for 600 crowns behind the stage, not even facing the artist. So this physical, or this need or thirst for physical or an authentic live experience is actually increasing, and we see it very clear in the price statistics. And it's based on these human skills that it's really costing a lot for artificial intelligence to predict, like intuition and empathy. But also, there will be a need in the future labor market for hybrid skills to be able to compete. And this graph is from the Economist magazine, and what's interesting here, I would say, is the two highest lines is that, of course, it's in this polarized trend, of course, it's math and social skills that is very strong and competitive. But it's also interesting how the third or the second, low math, high social skills is preferable for high math and low social skills. I talk about the sharing economy because I think we see this polarization on the labor market, and there's a lot of low-skilled jobs that needs to be created, and it could be, the sharing economy could be a bridge and lower the entry barriers to low-skilled jobs. The sharing economy is not a new phenomenon, but the fact that the low transactions costs are matching supply and demand so perfectly is actually increasing the spread of it. And it's this digitalized trust among peers instead of the traditional middle hands. So what we see is this, that verification or licenses are shifting toward traditional standards towards the peers deciding. So we have a lot of licenses being questioned. I was in the government's taxi investigation. They call it the Uber Pop investigation. So the Uber Pop is actually a way of replacing the traditional taxi license. And we said no to that because the maturity of the sector is not ready. So we have different forms of maturity when it comes to digitalized trust. But when it comes to some low-skilled jobs, the digitalized trust is very applicable. So local service sector jobs could go without middle hands and be depending on this trust or verification among peers. So there is a risk, but some sectors can handle it, I would say, and some cannot. And it will change over time also. Maybe in a couple of years we have the taxi license in a digitalized trust license phenomena. And also we need to embrace those services. We have to count them into traditional GDP, but also make them secure when it comes to employer responsibility and taxing and so on. And also there's a difference between local sharing economy and global sharing economy, because local economy, you can't really scale that up too much. But global you can, and the monopoly situations are really fast. There's perfect competitions on the digital platforms. You get a low and tailored offer, and you compete against the traditional dinosaurs because you're only matchmaker, you don't have the high fixed cost, and you don't apply to the regulatory burden. And of course this is questioned. In the banking sector you have the auction interest rate, but you also have to be aware of the risk on a default situation. But the fast monopoly situations are due to the critical mass of peers among the platforms. So the more critical mass of peers you have, the more this verification system and digitalized trust is strengthened. So the first mover advantage here is very, very clear. But when we look ahead and in the future, it's not a zero-sum game, because Airbnb have very much to gain from cooperating with traditional hotels. So has traditional hotels. When it comes to reducing slack and taking partnerships in laundry services, and so on. So I'm a very big fan of the sharing economy, but I think there's a lot of regulatory transparency and clearness that has to be applied to each sector at a time, because you have to identify the maturity of digitalized trust. And it's we see that transportation, living, finance, and services and local sectors are being challenged or embraced by the challenge, the sharing economy. You can also question the labor productivity growth of having this gig economy, right? Because if I get unemployed, well, first my wage in an economic recession would be auctioned to the bottom. So there has to be some kind of a minimum wage here if you tend to want to live on this. But say if I get unemployed and I want to put my services on a digital platforms, it could be, well, it could be nannying, it could be garden keeper, and the productivity in the society will somehow get affected due to this regression of specialization. Well, that's a cost that you have to pay, because actually this is happening to a lot of sectors, and it's the choice of the younger population. It's also the case of the younger population that we need transparency and co-creation for trust. We need to be invited early in the value chain to co-create and also co-innovate. And this needs well, this put pressures on the organizational structure and the identification for an organization as a node in a network. So you have to open up your data from an organizational point of view. You have to open up your database. You have to partner up with different actors, and you need to be extremely transparent. And the other side of this is that you have to put integrity and security in a focus. And I talk about the tipping point because say you are a large Swedish retail bank and you have bank clients that you know that they are gaining a lot of time optimization. So think about the time you spend on transactions and organization of private economy and economic advice, private economy advice, pre-digitalization in 1990s. And now, think about the hours you gain by doing it all on your mobile app or robotic advice, for example. So you get time optimization, but you're giving something away. You're giving your integrity to the bank. You're giving your transaction flows and information. So is this going to be okay? Well, for now, yes. But imagine when we have information everywhere we go, in our clothes, in our car, in our home, there will be a lot of information about our behavior. And I think my forecast is that citizens, clients, consumers, they want to use their integrity as a currency because there's a lot of value. The client database is the new type of gold. So there's a tipping point where I say I give away too much and get too less time optimization in return. So what the society and organizations need to do is to make both of these points of the scale transparent. So there will be a tipping point, or actually it will be balanced. That's when you get the trust. So I will summarize. If we are going to handle the fast transformation on the labor market, we need to incorporate lifelong and individual learning. For large organizations and the public sector, we could see that would be valuable as returns on investments, right? But for middle-sized and small companies and even self-employed, we're going to need some kind of voucher or some kind of incentives to keep the individual learning going on through the career. And digitalized trust is here to stay. There's a lot of security and trust that could be gained by applying the blockchain technology, but that's another theme for another seminar. And I hope I made my vision clear that there's a lot of gap. There's a lot of hidden value that, due to digitalization, that we cannot measure, that we need to put into light. And also the co-creation and transparency needs new laws and regulation to actually secure the social contract and the trust being a consumer, citizen, and client. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And I think now, while you had a bumpy ride flight into Gothenburg,
it was terrible.
Yeah, I heard. I understood that, but it was great now. Thank you. And what we heard this morning, we had lectures on democracy and philosophy, and then we had software, and now you're talking about economy, but you're also bridging over the overarching theme, I think, that we've had for the conference: opportunities and challenges with digitization. So I find it highly interesting, and we're just in the beginning of the conference. What to come? Tell me, have you got any questions? Yes, please, Patricia.
Patricia Lago from Amsterdam. I was triggered by your last point, actually. So, do I understand correctly? It is about co-creation and transparency, but with trust and security. So there is a lot of investment and concerns about security. Are you suggesting that co-creation and transparency are not in the picture and should be, are equally important, or how do they come hand in hand? Because I have the impression that the first, transparency, which is very important, and co-creation is evident from your talk, are not so much addressed.
So thank you for this very good question. When it comes to the regulatory framework and you look at the security perspective on the integration, there's a gap between, well, you know that the PUL, personupplysningslagen, are going to be replaced by EU's law on integrity in 2018, which means that every company really has to be more or put more resources on compliance when it comes to integrity, and it will kind of take us a step back. But there's a gap between what we people would argue be the tipping point for what we gain in return. But there will be a demand to be very individual when it comes to my tipping point and where I get security from choosing and selecting that individual tipping point. So every company and organization really needs to adapt tools so there can be this balance. But the security and regulatory aspect, there's some gap, but it's actually is going to be here to stay. And if you as a company or as a country manage to have co-creation and transparency really parallel to keeping the security on the individual choice of transparency, then you really get this societal contract and trust for consumers. Did I answer your question, or?
And that also, I think, what we had in our first lecture, we talked a bit about what do we actually need to embrace in society that comes from our old values and what it means to be a human in society today, more of a philosophical reasoning. And I think you're addressing that a bit. What do we actually need when it comes to economy? What do we need to embrace in our system? Because we all talk about change, and we know that change is inevitable, and we are at many kind of tipping points. But could you sort of detail that more? What do you think is important from a Swedish perspective in society when it comes to economy, when it comes to GDP, when it comes to growth and value creation? What is from the old? What do we need to embrace? I mean, you've worked with large corporations, and I believe you have these questions all the time. How much shall we change?
Well, it's a parallel process, because the value chains are being either slashed, or the middle hands or the nodes in the value chains are becoming digitalized. And at the same time, you need this transparency for the digital offer and being in an ecosystem. So you cannot only do the platform ecosystem co-creation for the clients. At the same time, you need to look at your inventories, and you need to look at the last mile. You need to look at all the value chains at the same time as you give the digital offer. So it's a really dual, you cannot go, it's a hard job. So whenever because companies tend to partner up with digital startups, and they think, well, we buy this company, or we partner up with this front runner or digital startup that has this wonderful interface for the client. We cannot do that if you don't digitalize the in-house value chains from inventory to last mile. So there's actually no way around it.
So it's a bit like Gartner says, it's bimodal. You need to do a bit of the old, and you need to do the new, and you need to do it at the same time.
Right.
And it's a tough job. Thank you very much, Anna. I'll give you some chocolate.
Thank you.